I'll get us started here with some introductions. So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here, Chris and Alene. So this is the National Food Law Student Network Spring Career Event, and the National Food Law Student Network originated out of Harvard's Food Law Policy Clinic, and it's a collaboration of law students from various law schools throughout the country. And we work together to put together events like this and newsletters and share career opportunities and networking events and that sort of thing. So for our career events this year, we decided to focus on where food law intersects with other areas of the law to try and help students learn about different avenues for careers they could pursue, and to help bring like networking opportunities to students and give them an opportunity to discuss this. So I'm very happy you're all here. Obviously, this one's going to be about animal law, and we have two really great speakers. We also, it's my understanding that we have the Harvard Animal Law Society is streaming this, as well as Maryland's Food Law Society, and I think Vermont Law School might be streaming this as well. So if maybe Samantha, if you could hop on quickly and talk about Harvard's Animal Law Society and what you guys are doing, that would be good.
Yeah, so I'm Samantha. I'm an events.
It's okay if there's a technical difficulty and you're unable to do this.
Samantha. I'm Harvard Animal Law Society event coordinator. And we just host events throughout the year regarding animal related things, and it's a wide variety. So last year we had an exciting event about dairy farmers and the intersection of reproduction rights and dairy cattle. And this year we're doing this event. We're also doing like an altruism event later this semester. And so, yeah, it's really an exciting place to be. And we are supported by the Animal Law and Policy program at Harvard, which our panelist, Chris, used to be the executive director of. So I will pass it off if there are any other streamers.
I'm not sure that they're going to have that they have the ability to speak, because Emily just texted me. So I'll chime in for Maryland's Food Law Society. They're a student-run organization. Yeah, it's okay, Emily. It's okay, Emily. They're a student-run organization that does a lot of events around various issues in food law. So, such as this, or like last year they did an event on the Prop 12 case that happened, or maybe they'll bring in like students to talk about internships in food law and that sort of thing. So they're here as well, streaming it, even though we can't see them. And then Vermont Law School, I assume it's something similar, and we have Fallon over who's doing that. Let's see. Okay, so Fallon is one of the co-presidents along with Samantha, and she says that she's streaming this between the Food and Ag Law Society and Animal Law Society at Vermont Law School. Okay, so those are all the folks that we have streaming this today. And then I'm going to start by reading off some of the speakers' bios for Chris and Alene. And then we're going to start with Alene, who's going to give us about 10-15 minutes background about her career. And then Chris will go, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. We have some questions that were submitted during the registration. So for Chris Green is the executive director of the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where he previously established the organization's legislative affairs program and was its director from 2013 to 2015. For the past 8 years, Chris has served as the inaugural executive director of the Brooks McCormick Jr. Animal Law and Policy Program at Harvard Law School, and he is also the former chair of the American Bar Association's TIPS Animal Law Committee. In those capacities, Chris persuaded the top 3 U.S. airlines to stop transporting endangered animal hunting trophies, helped defeat ag-gag legislation in several states, and successfully passed ABA-wide resolutions recommending that all U.S. legislative bodies outlaw the possession of dangerous wild animals and provide police officers with non-lethal animal encounter training. Chris also served on a National Academies of Sciences committee assessing the Department of Veterans Affairs' use of dogs in biomedical research. Chris regularly testifies at legislative hearings on animal protection matters, and he has been quoted on animal legal issues in dozens of major media outlets. Green is a graduate of Harvard Law School and the University of Illinois, where he created the college's first environmental science degree. Chris also spent several decades working in the fine arts, film, and music industries and currently manages an Illinois farm that has remained in his family for 185 years. In 2022, Chris received the American Bar Association's Award for Excellence in the Advancements of Animal Law. Quite the CV. And then for Alene, she has a very interesting work. Alene Anello is the founder and president of Legal Impact for Chickens, or LIC. LIC is a 501c3 litigation nonprofit which brings strategic lawsuits for chickens and other farmed animals. LIC develops and refines creative methods to enforce existing cruelty laws in factory farms and to sue companies that break animal welfare commitments. You may have seen LIC's Costco shareholder derivative suit in the Washington Post, Fox Business, or CNN Business, or even on TikTok. Alene graduated from Harvard Law School, clerked for a federal judge, and then started litigating for animals. She has worked at the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and the Good Food Institute. She's licensed to practice law in New York, the District of Columbia, and California. Alene is committed to helping chickens to honor the memories of her two beloved avian family members, Conrad and Zeke. And these days, Alene shares her life with two new birds, Haley and Stanley. So without further ado, Alene, if you would like to begin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge honor to get to talk to you all. And thank you all for caring about food law and for being interested in animal law enough to come to this panel. So as she explained, I'm Alene. And when I was in law school, I definitely benefited from the food law movement. I was in the food law and policy clinic and got to go to one of the, I don't know if it was the first ever like national food law conferences for students. So super excited to be talking to you all. And everyone's picture just turned to like either a static picture or a name. Is that normal? Hopefully that's normal.
Yeah, they're only
Okay.
seeing.
Okay, great. Sorry, everybody. So my story is that when I was 11 years old, my parents bought me a bird as a present, and he was a cockatiel, and his name was Conrad. And when I got him, he immediately changed my whole life. Before Conrad, I thought of birds as more like objects, like they're kind of like parts of nature or just something so different from a person. And then once I met Conrad, the first thing that surprised me was touching him. I just noticed that his body was warm, and I hadn't realized that birds are warm-blooded like people and mammals. And then as I got to know him more, I immediately realized like he wanted things and he was scared of things and he would scream when he was upset. And if he was happy, he would like sing a beautiful song. And if he liked you, he would let you pet him, and he'd get really upset when you left him alone. And it just immediately changed my whole understanding of birds, that they're like somebody and they have feelings. So that got me interested in animal protection. And once I was in college, I learned about battery cages and how at that time it was like 90 or 99% of birds used for eggs in the US were kept in cages so small that they couldn't spread their wings. So I got interested in trying to stand up against that and got involved in a cage-free eggs campaign. Now there's been a lot of progress on that. So I think it's more like 50% of the US eggs come from birds kept in tiny cages so small that they can't spread their wings, which is still horrible, but it's improvement. So after college, I worked at PETA because I wanted to help animals, and it was really fun. It made me feel so good about myself to like know that I had a purpose in life and that I was working to address these things that really concerned me, like animal cruelty. But after a certain amount of time, I started feeling like a little bored in my job and wanting more challenge. And so the lawyers at PETA were very, very impressive. They were like always like winning cases and things like that. And I wanted to be just like them. So I decided to go to law school and went to Harvard and ran the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund. And I got to intern at the Animal Legal Defense Fund where Chris works. And I have an Animal Legal Defense Fund water bottle with me. Sadly, I don't have a Legal Impact for Chickens water bottle, but But this is like the best water bottle ever, by the way. Sorry to everyone who doesn't have one. Um, so yeah, so I worked at Animal Legal Defense Fund, and my job there was doing litigation for animals, suing like suing people that abuse animals and looking for like ways to be able to be in civil court over animal cruelty, which is very, very hard. And from the Animal Legal Defense Fund, I learned about the fact that every state in the US has a law against animal cruelty and neglect. And I learned that unfortunately, these laws are basically not followed on factory farms. And so one of the things that Animal Legal Defense Fund puts a lot of focus on is private civil enforcement. And I got really interested in that specific part of ALDF's work. So yeah, because I've always been very interested in farmed animals, like I explained. So I ended up getting a job briefly at the Good Food Institute, and then going back to the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And then ultimately in 2021, my bird Conrad died. He had cancer, and we had tried really hard to treat it, but it didn't work. And so when that happened, I was really, really sad and spent a long time mourning. And then I started thinking to myself, like, I've always had this fantasy of starting my own nonprofit ever since back when I worked at PETA. And maybe now that I'm like in mourning is a really good time to do it, because I can be really motivated by wanting to honor Conrad's memory and also the memory of my other bird, Zeke, who tragically also died that same year. So I started Legal Impact for Chickens, and we're a litigation nonprofit that sues companies that abuse animals on factory farms. So a lot of what we do is stuff that we basically learned or copied from Animal Legal Defense Fund, but we are more narrow in that we're just focused on civil litigation, not any like lobbying or legal education really, except for stuff like this. And we're just focused on farmed animals, not helping animals in labs or zoos or other animals who need help. And we also are really, really small. So we're a new startup. There's 3 of us right now. We are hoping to grow. The first lawsuit we brought was a shareholder derivative case against Costco's executives. And this is like, because it's one way to hold people accountable for causing a company to commit illegal animal cruelty. So yeah, that's our story and my story. And I guess as for advice for people who are looking for a career, the number one piece of advice that I always wish somebody would have given me is like, trust yourself and do something that you find enjoyable. And it's okay to be creative and to do something different from what all your law school classmates are doing. I feel like a lot of times in law school, I would ask people for advice and they would give me like very strict advice, like you need to do X or else your life will be terrible, or you need to do Y or else your life will be terrible. And I feel like that's just really not true. There's like so many different possibilities beyond the ones that you know about and beyond the ones that people will tell you about. And one of the most important factors nobody told me to consider was like, what do you personally enjoy? So the reason Legal Impact for Chickens only does litigation and not like lobbying or any other way of helping animals is just because I felt that litigation was like my personal interest and strengths. And so I just figured my life will be happier if I focus on one thing that I really like rather than trying to think, oh, well, animals really need this other thing too. Like animals need a lot of things, and there's a lot of problems in the food industry. There's pollution and child labor and lots of things, and you can't probably fix all of them. So it's okay to just pick the one that is most interesting to you, that you're most passionate about, and pick the skill set that you like working on and do that. So that would be my advice.
Hey, great. Thanks, Alene. Are you ready to go, Chris?
Yeah.
Right.
And even Lean, as I recall, you at first didn't even think you would like to do litigation, and you thought you would kind of give it that's the other thing I would really advise people too, is just to try things. Like nothing's forever. You can try something for a year or two, and either A, you can eliminate it, or B, you might find that you really enjoy it, like Aline did with her work at ALDF when she started litigating there. Well, great. Well, thanks. So a little bit, I'll start with a little bit about my own history. So as was mentioned in my bio, we have a farm that's remained in my family for, actually it's a little bit longer now. I think it's 187 years this year. And I spent a lot of time there as a child, and now it's all corn and soybeans. But at the time, I've been managing for about the last 2 decades. But when I was a child, there were animals there, and I got to spend a lot of time with them and just really get to see them and know them as unique individuals. Especially the piglets. You'd have a litter of piglets, and you'd have one that would be kind of shy and timid, another one that would be really energetic and boisterous. And I just saw that they had a whole range of personalities, sort of like my friends did. And just saw that they, see that they have kind of a value that was greater than just the weight of their flesh. And we had some dairy cattle there, and they had the automatic milking machines that just sort of come around, and it just didn't look very fun for the animals to me. And so to this day, I've never drank a full glass of milk in my life. I never even tasted cheese till I was about 11, and rarely ate meat, and haven't eaten any animals in like 37 years at this point. But that's what really got me introduced at an early age to thinking about these issues. And eventually I had some other experiences, visiting SeaWorld as a small child and visiting a zoo in Peoria that just really made me ultimately want to do something about that. But, the field of animal law didn't exist. Animal rights existed, but there weren't that many careers that seemed available. So when I was in college, I stumbled into an environmental science course that was team taught by an economist, a sociologist, and a biologist. And it really did just seem like a wonderful interdisciplinary way of approaching these bigger issues. And so I transferred to the University of Illinois to finish my undergraduate work and created their first environmental science degree program, because I thought even though animal stuff was really important to me, we all have to breathe the air, we all have to drink the water. Like, it seemed a little bit looking at a bit of a bigger picture. But then once I got to law school, the environmental side of things felt a little confining to me, just for my own personality type. And again, I don't want to give environmental law short shrift whatsoever. I just was a little uncertain. So I took 6 years off to do some work in the entertainment industry, and then I thought really hard about what I wanted to do. And I'd always wanted to be a veterinarian was my first love, and so that was what I was planning to do. And then I had a high school guidance counselor tell me I'd never get good enough grades to get into veterinary school. I see her selling macrame still at our county fair, and I end up going to a fairly decent law school. But after thinking about this for a while, I kind of decided that animals were my primary passion, and so I actually applied to veterinary school and got in. That was what I was going to do. And then Suzanne Richardson, who was the former dean of students at Harvard Law School, and it's an absolute guardian angel to me. She calls me up and said, "Hey man, it's been 6 years. The ad board's rolling over. This could be your window closing if you want to come back." And I said, "I'm sorry to tell you, Suzanne, I really don't think I'm coming back to law school. The animal stuff is more important to me. I'm going to go to veterinary school." And she's like, "I can't believe you're saying that, because we literally have this guy, Steve Wise, coming in to teach our first ever animal rights law course." This was in the summer of '99 when we were having this conversation. It's literally front page news in the New York Times because it's seen as such a progressive step. And we don't have the exact number, but I think Harvard was maybe the fourth or fifth school to ever teach an animal law course. So it's really amazing that they were kind of on the vanguard. And so I talked to the vet school and reformulated my plans. And so I basically returned to law school essentially just to take the course with Steve. And yeah, it just did sort of a complete 90-degree angle turn on my career. I realized I didn't need to go learn the plumbing to do the larger policy work. That was much more important to me. And so Steve agreed to oversee my third-year written work requirement, which I don't know, I don't think is still required there. But I then finished up my coursework, went on tour with one of Metallica guys for 6 months, and saved up enough cash that I could then do like a 2-year self-finance fellowship where I turned my third-year paper into a bigger piece of scholarship. And that got published in the Animal Law Review, which then sort of got me launched in the field. And the issue I was writing about just so happened to be, it's because I still had a foot in veterinary camp. I wrote it about veterinary malpractice and the role that plays in the companion animal valuation debate, which back then in the early 2000s was like the hot issue in animal law. For some, it just, the world just kind of turned under my feet. And so, yeah, I spent a couple of years reading and researching and producing some scholarship on that. Sorry, I'm going to turn off my notifications here. And that kind of got me launched in the field. But at the time, there wasn't really much of a practicing field in animal law. So there weren't really many job opportunities. So I continued kind of taking a page from David Wolfson's book. I don't know if many of you are familiar with David Wolfson, but he is now the executive director of Milbank, this massive New York law firm. But he was always able to do great work as this big law firm partner, but also have a really significant impact on the field of animal law through teaching, through doing some incredible writing. Some of his scholarship's phenomenal on the McLibel case, and he was one of the first to write about farmed animal issues and how their sort of farmed animals are sort of beyond the law because they're categorically excluded from the Federal Animal Welfare Act. And in 26 states or 27 states, they are either categorically excluded from state anti-cruelty statutes or are excluded under what's called usual and customary farming practices. But anyway, he did something completely distinct for his income, but was able to do sort of animal law on the side as his main passion. And so I tried to do that for a while myself, doing work in the film and fine arts realm, and then still writing and speaking about these animal law topics. But eventually I hit a point where I just realized the animal law stuff was much more important to me. And I went to ALDF. I spoke at a conference in New Orleans. And I went to go see what else was going on. And I went to ALDF's website and it said events and opportunities. And I was like, opportunities? So I click on it and it had job listings. And I was like, job listings? Like there used to be so few of them, they would all just disappear by word of mouth. And the first one listed there was to be the legislative director to establish a legislative affairs program at ALDF. And I couldn't have found something more aligned with my interest and thinking. And so I ended up applying and just sort of reverse a ratio where I finally was able to make that the central focus of my professional life. And my only regret in that is that I didn't do it sooner. So it was an amazing time. I really loved the on the ground in the trenches work of doing legislative work at ALDF. And that's right when ag-gag was in its full heyday. And so I think there was 13 different ag-gag bills or 15 different ag-gag bills introduced that year, and we defeated all but 2 of them, which was, and it really taught me the value of working in coalitions because, as I frequently say, as animal advocates, I see us as the Lilliputians, right? We're up against these multi-billion-dollar industries, and the only way we're going to have any hope of victory is to coalesce and collaborate. And so, coming from the legislative side of things, they were much more into building large groups of coalitions to effectively do these legislative drives and get these things passed. And that was a really great training for me to see the value of that. But then after 2.5 years at Harvard, I met Professor Kristen Stilts, and she had transferred to Harvard from Northwestern and was very much interested in animal law. And so she expressed that when she was being recruited. And as a result, David Wolfson, who I mentioned before, was able to find Brad Goldberg, a donor, to go set up the funding to launch and build this whole animal law program around Kristen. And so they reached out to me, and I was able to join Kristen in helping build that for the past 8 years. And again, I was very happy at ALDF and thought I would continue to do that for forever. But I just realized the value of being able to come build this program at Harvard and, kind of attach Harvard's name to this issue that means so much to all of us, and that would be a much more valid use of my time at that point. And it was, I would do it again in Harvard. It was absolutely incredible. This, as I said in my kind of going away statement, was the single most meaningful job I've ever had was there at Harvard, working directly with the students and collaborating really closely with the food law and policy clinic and some folks in Andy Mergen there now in the environmental law clinic. Just really so many great, thoughtful people and just amazing students coming through. And then we were able to launch the Harvard Animal Law and Policy Clinic, where we then could work directly on cases and file our own lawsuits and work on our own policy projects. So again, I was very happy there and thought I might stay there. And then just in December, this opportunity came up to go back to ALDF and kind of help guide them through some transitionary times and to just kind of take a fresh look and bring a fresh perspective to the work there. And again, looking at impact, everything was going so great at Harvard. We got this great program built. We've got an endowment to sustain it financially. And I just thought, sort of looking at movement wide, what my impact might be, I thought I could have a greater impact coming back to ALDF and really helping them kind of, helping draft a new chapter of what their advocacy looks like. So that's my background. So as far as some major trends in the field of animal law currently, we're very fortunate at Harvard to have a real impact in 2 different realms, I feel. The first is in the realm of regulatory policy relating to cultivated meat and poultry products. So, as many of you know, alternative proteins is a very hot sector right now. And you've got both the plant-based alternative proteins, but also what are now being called cultivated, formerly cultured proteins that are kind of grown directly from a substrate where you don't actually, you're growing real meat that's molecularly identical to slaughtered meat, except you don't have to raise and kill an animal to get it. So I attended the first cellular agriculture conference in San Francisco in 2016 that was hosted by a group called New Harvest. And I couldn't believe that nobody there was really talking about regulation because to me, it seemed sort of an existential concern. And so when I would ask people about it, they were like, I would either met with a dirty look or a blank stare. The dirty look folks were like, hey, shut the hell up. We're trying to fundraise here. The blank stare folks were like, I'm a scientist or I'm an entrepreneur. Like, I'm sure some smart lawyer will figure that out down the road. But then I would say, well, you know what happened with genetically modified salmon, right? And so in that instance, from this company filing their first FDA permit application for genetically modified salmon to it finally being able to be sold on store shelves, it was 27 years. So imagine you create the perfect cultivated chicken nugget, and you're telling you're telling your investors that they might finally see a return in 2060. So again, I view this as kind of existential concern. So I came back to Harvard, had good conversations with Kristen and also with Emily in the food law clinic. And we decided to hold this roundtable. I mean, one thing that Harvard really has is the ability to convene. And so we had several of the heads of several of these companies. We also was a little concerned about what I call the Leroy Jenkins effect, where, as these companies started to become a little bit more, I mean, many of them started out very mission driven, but as they started to become a little bit more competitive with each other, there was a concern that one of them might try to run through this regulatory doorway unprepared and kind of get everyone else behind them slaughtered. So we convened this thing. We had heads of several companies. We had several former FDA attorneys. We had several scientists, Mark Post, who invented the first ever cultivated hamburger, Vince Seawalt and some others. And then we even had Ann Veneman, a former US Secretary of Agriculture. And we had about 24 people, and we put them in this like sort of closed door room and just completely confidential conversation to try and assess the regulatory landscape and see if we could collectively come up with an ideal pathway through that. And we kind of did. We came to some really good consensus, and we decided to sort of share that information with the USDA and FDA, because at the time, that very summer, this summer of 2018, the two agencies were starting to fight with each other a little bit over who exactly would have control over the regulation of cultivated products. And so we kind of found a way that would involve them both a little bit and try and solve some of that turf battling as well. And pretty much the agencies did exactly as we recommended. They almost verbatim the way that they divvied up the various jurisdiction among the two of them. And there were people at first who only wanted to see it go to FDA because there was some concern that the USDA might be overly captured, or at least sympathetic to the existing conventional meat industry. But one great aspect is that the Food Safety and Inspection Service with USDA has much stronger preemption powers over state laws that might interfere or try and encroach on the same territory than the FDA does. So we definitely wanted FSIS to have labeling authority, which they now do. But then as a result of that, we thought, okay, well, great, we get FSIS as labeling, but there was still some concern that they might get a little overly restrictive. So one of our students at the time, Kelly McGill, working through our Animal Law and Policy Clinic, drafted a 20-page sort of letter to the USDA, kind of just reminding them of their constitutional obligations should they decide to get a little bit more restrictive than necessary. And we, sent it off, and they wrote back saying, "Thank you. We're in receipt of your formal petition for rulemaking." We're like, "Okay, great. Glad you want to treat it like that." And so a year later, the USDA FSIS puts out this open advance notice of proposed rulemaking where they seek public comment on what everyone thinks should happen with regards to the labeling of cultivated meat and poultry products. So again, working through the clinic, we were able to submit comments for that. And I was just told by someone internally at USDA that the final rule is likely to come out in the coming months here. But in the interim, they basically were able to kind of forge a template, and it was really cool to see in the Federal Register. There's even a section that says Harvard Animal Law and Policy Clinic. They basically kind of use this as a foil and say, hey, look, the only reason we're doing this is those pesky Harvard people are holding our feet to the fire with this, petition for rulemaking. So it was really great to have that sort of impact and have that sort of access. And in the interim, they've provided some approvals for labeling of cultivated products on a ad hoc basis for a couple of companies already, Upside Foods and the Good Meat Company. So that's it's pretty heartening to see that that they are not being obstructive and they are treating this like sort of any other American agricultural product and doing what they can to try and get it into the public's hands and available for purchase. So again, and just shows you too. So it was cool that Kelly McGill, she I first met her when she came to see Bruce Friedrich from the Good Food Institute speak at Harvard in one of those rooms, right, that the students are sitting in there now, in 2016, and went up to him and said that her dream one day was to work for GFI. And then 6 years later, after going and taking the LSAT, applying to Harvard Law School, and being very active in the Food Law Society and being very active in the Animal Law Society and effective altruist, her second job out of law school was working for the Good Food Institute in their policy shop, and now she's back at Harvard working as a fellow in our Animal Law and Policy program. But it just shows you, even as a student, and the impact that one individual can have. I mean, she, almost single-handedly drafted this letter to the USDA that led to all this amazing outcomes. I think little press for time. One of the other issues that we've been very actively involved in is the issue over ballot initiatives regarding the intense confinement of animals raised for food. I started at Harvard in September of 2015, right as the signature gathering process was starting for Massachusetts Question 3. And it was amazing to have all my legislative colleagues kind of descend on Massachusetts and be involved in that process. And I was very deeply involved, and Alene and several of other students would go out and collect signatures. And I think we gathered double the number of signatures it took to get on the ballot. And so it eventually it got on the ballot in 2016 and passed with 77.7% of the vote. Not only saying that these certain types of production, such as using battery cages, gestation crates for breeding sows, and tethering of veal, not only are you not allowed to use those methods in Massachusetts, but Massachusetts was the first state to say that you're also not allowed to sell products into the state that have been raised using those methods. California shortly thereafter followed suit with Proposition 12 that was passed in 2018 that added those same things as a sales ban, but also being a much larger state. I mean, I think California is something like the 5th largest economy in the world, gave them a lot more market power to really force the hand of producers. When you had, again, there, I think it passed with 63% of the vote. So you've got 63% of California voters saying that they strongly feel that any farmed animal products sold in their state should not be raised using those cruel forms of extreme confinement. So you think this is great victory, you get these ballot initiatives passed in the first place, but then industry challenges them. So then there's a long battle. I think there were 5 different lawsuits challenging Prop 12. And as many of you know, it went all the way up to the US Supreme Court. And again, that's where we were able to have a big impact. We have Kelsey Eberly, former ALDF attorney, now at FarmStand, came in to spend a couple months as a fellow with us and produced a really great report on all the negative ramifications that could happen if the Supreme Court decided the other direction. And then our Animal Law and Policy Clinic, Rebecca Garverman and Ashton McFarland helped draft this incredible amicus brief representing several other animal protection organizations, and was the main brief to focus on the animal welfare aspects of what was going on, and what was at stake in that decision. And Kelsey and I were able to publish an op-ed with Professor Larry Tribe, one of the world's foremost constitutional scholars, who I think has taught con law to 3 of the sitting U.S. Supreme Court justices. And the day before oral argument, the LA Times published an op-ed by the 3 of us that also happened to be Larry Tribe's 80th birthday. But those things all can know the impact those have, and miraculously the Supreme Court decides in our favor. Unanimously, people talk about how that decision was fractured, but they were sort of fractured mainly on this sort of balancing test and back end of it. But when it came to the core constitutional question of whether it was a valid exercise of the powers of the state of California to ban these production methods, it was unanimous, 9-0, that not one single justice said that they felt that that was unconstitutional, which was huge to have the Supreme Court put their sort of stamp on that. And so then you think, okay, great, we've won the Supreme Court, awesome, but it still doesn't stop there. Now industry is putting pressure on legislatures on federal legislators to overturn the Supreme Court decision legislatively with what's called the EATS Act, which is the latest incarnation of what was formerly known as the King Amendment, which again, we put out a report in 2018 and kept that out of the, and Linder drafted that as a fellow back in 2018. And we were told directly by folks at the Senate Agriculture Committee that report was key in getting it knocked out of the King Amendment, knocked out of the Farm Bill in 2018. And of course, these things could never pass on their own, right? 96% of Americans say that they feel that the animals raised for food and fiber should not endure any suffering or cruelty. But yet, obviously, the law doesn't reflect that. But there's no way that they could get one of these laws passed through Congress on its own. The only way to get it passed is attaching it to like a must-pass bill like the Farm Bill. So that's why there's such a massive fight going on right now with the EATS Act. But I think it's great. I'm very optimistic about it. I think this will be sort of the ultimate trifecta of like passing these ballot initiatives in the first place, defending them through litigation all the way through the U.S. Supreme Court, then winning this open field legislative fight with industry throwing everything they have at it. Because pork producers have not had to start to comply with Prop 12, on January 1st of this year. So if it doesn't make into the Farm Bill this year, it's not going to get another chance for at least another 5 or 6 years. And by then, most of the producers will be in compliance anyway, which is exactly what we've seen with the egg industry coming into compliance after the passage of Prop 2 in 2008 and the succeeding California egg law. So those are sort of the two major trends I see that we've been most active in lately, and it's really exciting. And I think the great thing, there's very few opportunities at the federal level. I mean, God, this Congress can't even pass like infrastructure bills now that everyone gets forward without a massive fight. So having a piece of federal legislation that every single animal protection organization out there and every food advocacy organization out there can reach out to every single one of their members and supporters and say, call your local member, call your member of Congress, tell them to oppose this. If we win this victory, like everyone will feel that they actually had a very active role in it. So lastly, I'll just, as far as advice on how to break into this kind of work, the Office of Public Interest Advising did something really amazing. They did a really great thing that they did a few years back in the main hallway of the law school, where they had all these poster boards of people, graduates who had these just absolute dream public interest jobs, like the head of the NRDC or the head of NOW or the head of Lambda Legal Defense or something like that. GLAD. But they said they had a picture of them and it had their little bio, but at the bottom they had this horizontal bar graph that was color coded, and each of those different colored chunks represented a different job that they'd had before they got to this ultimate dream job. And I think the average was 5. Like they'd had 5 other jobs bouncing around before they finally got to this position where they are now. So it isn't just they got lucky or whatever, but it really was instructive, because I think students these days put way too much pressure on themselves that whatever job they take right out of law school is going to dictate how the rest of their life turns out. And as Alene can attest, that's not the case. Even if you take a job and do something you hate, you then now know that you don't like doing that, and it steers you towards to finding the things that you do like doing. So my main advice was just, if you think you might be interested in something, go give it a shot. And you're making it through 3 years of law school. You can kind of hold your nose and get through anything else for a year or two. And if you like it, great, keep going that direction. If you don't, cool, go do something else. Again, you're going to come out of here with great educations and lawyers as lawyers, and you're going to be able to find a spot somewhere. The other thing I would say is, like, don't necessarily feel the pressure that you have to follow in Alene's footsteps and go work full time in the movement right out of law school. I would highly recommend any of you clerk who have the opportunity to do so. But we've got some great, we just are adding someone to the ALDF board right now who's a third year associate at a big major law firm in New York, who is able to spend about 40% of her time doing animal protection pro bono work for ALDF and HSUS and PETA and other organizations. So I think at ALDF we have something like 2,500 attorneys in our pro bono network. So there's a lot of different ways you can find a way to make a difference and really contribute to this realm. So that's the advice I would give, and we'll turn it over for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both so much. Yeah, that was so great. We have a series of questions. We'll see just how many we can get through, but firstly, we had a question if would either of you be willing to allow people to reach out to you if they have like further questions beyond this webinar? Okay. So then the first like substantive question is, what are some of the most difficult challenges with the work that you do in terms of litigation versus policy perspectives? Whoever wants to go first, yeah.
I just talked for a long time.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I understand the question. Challenges I could talk about, but I don't know about litigation versus policy. I don't know what that means.
I think she means like you work in litigation and Chris has done the legislative policy side. I think that's how the question was.
Oh, okay, that's easy. So I only have to answer about the litigation part. Okay. So challenges for me, I don't know if this is useful to tell people or not, but since I just started Legal Impact for Chickens in 2021, and now I'm running it and kind of creating it as I run it, that my challenges, the things that feel most challenging for me are all related to that. So like learning, like I never supervised anyone in any of my previous jobs before I started Legal Impact for Chickens. So learning to supervise people has been like so hard for me. And yeah, I think actually that's my biggest challenge, I would say overall. When it comes to litigation, I mean, maybe that's the biggest challenge and that's what's on my mind most, just because it's like so new for me. When it comes to litigation, I guess our biggest challenge is just like we lose a lot. And I think there's a lot of reasons that animal lawyers lose a lot. And I think one of the reasons is because, well, there's like a lot of reasons. Like, first of all, the law is not really designed for animals. So like Chris was explaining when he was talking about David Wolfson's like scholarship, there's just like all these terrible exemptions in laws that make it harder to protect farmed animals, for example. And even when you're trying to help animals that are not farmed animals, most states make it like really hard for animals to actually sue. So, and it make it really hard for people to sue on animals' behalf. So you have to kind of like be super creative if you're trying to come up with a way to sue for animal cruelty. And then when you're being super creative, you're going to be the first person doing whatever you're doing, and then it's more likely that a judge is going to say like, no, you don't have standing, or no, that's not a valid cause of action, or no, that's like not really a violation of law, or something like that. And then I think so the main reason I think that animal lawyers tend to lose a lot, including at Legal Impact for Chickens, is like the law is not as good as it should be. Like the statutes aren't as good as they should be, and there's not as good case law as I would like there to be, which we're trying to change. Then the other problem is, I think that because judges are humans and humans are like, we have psychology, and there's like certain features of our psychology that I think can be kind of harmful to animals. Like one is we're really focused on whoever's similar to us, and we're much more focused on the welfare of other humans than the welfare of animals. And then the other is that people, and especially judges, really like things staying the same and like the status quo, and they really don't tend to be in favor of change, or at least judges more than people in general. So I think like human psychology can also make it harder for animal lawyers to win, even when you think like, oh, we actually have a perfect statute and the perfect facts and everything is lined up and perfect, we should win. And then sometimes you still lose. And then I think that can be sometimes because it's just like human psychology is like sometimes against us in certain ways. Yeah, that's my answer.
And I can chime in on the legislative side of the policy side of things. You know, my experience has been that you do have to be strategic. I mean, there is such a thing as sort of resource. I mean, there are some political resources that are limited, and it's not just sort of funding for the movement, but you know, legislators only have so much time, and there's only so many bills that they can run, and different things have a tendency to take up oxygen. It's not like you can go just run 20 bills one year. But as I was saying about the question 3 example, advocates tried in the Massachusetts legislature, even though we had polling showing that 80% of Massachusetts voters felt that these types of extreme confinement should be banned. We could not, I think 7 years running, try to run a bill to do that, and kept getting denied by the Joint Agriculture Committee. Wouldn't even get it to the floor, even though we had all this support. You couldn't even get a bill like that to the floor of the Massachusetts State House because it was being bottled up and killed in committee. And oftentimes these agricultural committees are staffed by people who either have close ties to the agricultural industry or are from rural communities, et cetera. So that's what's great. We have ballot initiatives. I think it's 24 states have the ability to kind of circumvent the legislature and say, okay, well, we know all the public feels this way. So you're providing this undemocratic roadblock to having the public will reflected in our laws of our state. We're just going to circumvent that and pass a law directly by the voice of the people. And that's what happened with question 3. And again, I mentioned 77.7% of the vote is what it passed with, which was almost exactly the 80% that we'd showed in the polling. So there's different avenues you can take when you do run into these legislative or regulatory roadblocks. But there is, as I said, the polling is really strong on animal issues. An example is one I worked on when I was at ALDF before. In the state of Arizona, there was this terrible bill. There's a legislator there who really cared about companion animal issues, and she tried to get a bill through that would have added some protections for some additional hoarding, things related to hoarding, and also some psychological requirements for people convicted of cruelty. And the cattlemen came in and killed that bill, but then they went to her and said, hey, we'll let those stupid cat and dog bill pass, their words, not mine, pass next year if you allow us to add on our wish list of the 20 terrible things we want to do to livestock. And sadly, that legislator took that deal without consulting with any of the animal protection organizations that have supported her. And so we had to fight to kill it, and striking off one by one. But they had this 20-item wish list, and you cut them down and cut them down and cut them down. But anyway, we managed to kill that bill 2 years in a row. And the third year, they were able to slide it through. Arizona has this weird thing called striker bills. We call them like zombie bills, like something you think you've killed. They can just basically cut and paste new text into a bill that's already made it through committee. It's bizarro. But anyway, so this passes. And so Governor Ducey, we had pressed him pretty hard when he was running for that office, knowing that this might come up again, and got some pretty good language from him. And so it went to his office, it went to his desk at I think, a Thursday afternoon, and he had 5 days to decide whether or not to sign or veto the measure. And so every animal protection organization drove in calls to his office. We also were able to drive in, which is a really great strategy, is if you're a smaller organization who because most legislators don't care if, I had one in New Orleans say, or Louisiana, like, looks like I lost 3 votes in Australia today. They don't really care if you're not one of their constituents. But one way you can have a great outsized impact is if you target the tourism boards of these states. So in that case, ALDF is able to reach out to our entire nationwide network of supporters and have them all call into the Arizona Department of Tourism saying, we will never come spend another tourism dollar in your state if you allow this to happen. And that was really effective. So anyway, from Thursday afternoon to Monday morning, when Governor Ducey came back in the office, he woke up to 19,248 calls or emails asking him to veto this measure. That basically would have taken livestock out of the cruelty code, even though we had polling showing 87% of Arizona voters. Even the lowest fraction of that was 80%. So 19,248 and guess how many calls or emails he had asking him to sign it? 3. So when you're an elected official, 19,248 to 3 is pretty simple math. And so here you've got this Republican governor and a Republican vetoed this bill. And the language he used was incredible, saying we should never, all animals in Arizona deserve our protection. And we should be very mindful of not increasing protections for one category of animal at the expense of another category. It's pretty incredible. And so you've got this Republican governor vetoing a bill overwhelmingly passed by his Republican legislature that was pushed by one of the biggest industries in the state. But the reason he did it is because that's where the voters were. So I do really feel when it comes to policy, we do have the public on our side, and we just finding a way to optimize how we get that represented in our state laws.
Okay, thanks. And I think we have time for one more question. So this one, I'm lumping them together, these two questions together because they're kind of in the same vein. It says, are there specific legal frameworks or practices that you believe can foster a cooperative relationship between animal advocates, like on the one side, and the agriculture industry on the other side to achieve shared goals? And then the other question that I'm lumping in with this says, how do you navigate the legal landscape to ensure that the welfare of farmed animals while considering the economic aspects of agriculture? So I assume like producing food cheaply would be what I assume this question is getting at.
Lee, do you want to go?
Yeah, so one thing I'm very excited about, well, this is not my area of expertise. But one thing that I'm excited about is Oklahoma right now has a bill to try to fight gestation crates, and Chris is nodding, so he might be able to explain it better than I can, but I know that the idea in the bill is to basically like help farmers and help pigs at the same time. And the way that they're doing it is by incentivizing farmers to switch to crate-free pork by, I don't exactly know what the incentive is. I think it's either like a tax break or something like that. So basically the idea is, I really like that idea because mostly it feels like it's animal advocates just fighting against the meat industry, but there's no real reason we need to be like doing that in every situation, because really what we want is for animals to be treated better, and what they want is money. And if they can make money and treat animals better, then that's a win-win, the way that I see it. So yeah, I guess like one idea is just looking for opportunities where the company can make more money by treating animals better. And then another, this one is like, I do think this is good for companies, but it's also going to be adversarial. Is one of the things Legal Impact for Chickens is very focused on is the fact that companies benefit by following the law and that companies are harmed by breaking the law. And so we believe that it's in every company's interest to follow the animal cruelty laws. But unfortunately, there might be specific executives working at a company that might not feel like that's in their particular interests. And so they might claim that it's not in the company's interests or just try to pretend that the law doesn't apply. But I think that's another way that everybody wins if we're following the law, because we should all be following the law, and that's better for animals too.
And I'll just add, yeah, I mean, we've seen, I mean, that was one of the great, I did some congressional briefings on the EATS Act in last June. And one of the folks there participating was Chris Oliveira, who is with a group called Neiman Ranch. And they are started as a small network of pork producers that has grown considerably. But, you know, it's sort of like, you know, the pitting environmentalists against loggers over the spotted owl, when they actually realized that they had a similar common foe in the large timber industry. And I think the same thing is true here with the large, increasingly consolidating meat industry and the way that it treats everyone who works in there, from the folks growing the animals to the ones slaughtering and processing them. They are all treated horrifically, in addition to the terrible animal cruelty that's happening. So and I know what they see is the price drops with this conglomeration, and it squeezes out small producers who may have been doing things in a more environmentally sustainable and less harmful way. And so these folks at Neiman banded together to try and create a market for higher welfare, more sustainable products. And again, it's, you know, nothing's perfect. It's impossible to raise animal for food in a way that doesn't involve some degree of cruelty and harm. But at least they're employing methods that are less cruel, not using gestation crates and not using antibiotics and things like that. And so they were a very strong ally on Prop 12, because when you've got the major meat industry out there saying, you know, this is going to hurt small farmers, like, absolutely not. It's only going to hurt these large conglomerates who've spent a fortune on all these like, factory farms with gestation crates. The small producers are already doing it less harmfully. So I think there's a lot of great, and you've seen several organizations get involved in what's called transformation, where they're trying to help animal producers transition into different types of agriculture that doesn't involve raising animals, raising and killing animals. And also, as I mentioned, on the plant-based and cultivated side, where you've got really innovative American industry coming up with novel products that may replace some of these others in a way that grows the economy and provides additional jobs. And as we're seeing, sort of with green economy things as well, with solar farms and wind farms and things like that, they're creating an incredible amount of jobs while also doing some great good in the process.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much. And with that, we're at exactly 7 o'clock. So I think it was good timing there. Yeah, so if anybody else has any other questions, I'd be happy to pass Chris and Aleen's information on to you.
Alene, it's great.
Okay.
But
yeah.
I said you can email all the questions to you. It's perfect.
and then I'll just say I don't know for all my answers.
Oh, you guys did great. I really appreciate it. And I wasn't aware of that law. Where did you say was going on in Oregon? Sorry,
Oklahoma.
what?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
that's
they're
very
providing financial incentives to basically, because the only real argument that producers have is that it's going to cost them more money to do this. And it's a lie. I mean, and it's certainly going to cost them to comply, but when they keep saying how it's going to increase the price of pork nationwide, that's just an absolute lie. The USDA themselves just came out with some numbers that even with the smaller number of Prop 12 compliant producers there are now, the added cost to a pound of pork has only gone up 6 cents. 6 cents per pound of pork, just in California. So to say that, and again, why on earth would it ever increase the price of pork in Florida if producers are having to comply to meet rules in California? It's just not true. And you heard all the same stuff from the egg producers, and now they're in full compliance. And Alene wrote a great paper when she was in law school, looking at this deal that was struck between HSUS and United Egg Producers, where they were actually introducing legislation that would have said a nationwide cage-free standard. And very interestingly, it was actually the national pork producers that killed that deal. So here you've got egg producers themselves wanting to do a cage-free, have a nationwide cage-free standard, and you've got other folks like the pork producers killing that. So again, I think we'll eventually get there. I think other states will keep moving in this direction. And again, it's what consumers want. So we'll eventually get to a place where that is the kind of de facto national standard.
All right. Thank you for that. Happy to end on a good note, positive note. Okay, well, we can't see everyone here, but applaud to Chris and Alene. Thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate you taking time out of your night to come and talk about your careers and to offer advice to people and to help build out the network, because that's what this is all about. So yeah, thank you guys both for coming.
Thank you so much for setting this up.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Caitlin and Samantha, for all the work you did, and to the Food Law Student Network. We're really grateful that you all exist. And yeah, just keep finding ways to keep doing this good work.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye, everyone.